Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the George W. Norris Legislative Chamber for the 43rd day of the 108th Legislature, second session. Our chaplain for today is Father Michael Eckley, St. Wenceslaus Catholic Church, Omaha, in Senator Von Gilleren's district. Please rise.
Good morning. Let us pray together. The ancient prophet Isaiah states, "The Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, a spirit of wisdom and of understanding, a spirit of counsel and of strength, a spirit of knowledge and of fear of the Lord." Almighty God, as always, we gather in your presence. Guide us so that our gathering may also be in your holy name and that we are attentive to your holy will. We ask your blessing to be upon this assembly, whose members have been given a sacred trust from those who have elected them and sent them here as their representatives. Grant them this day the gifts Isaiah spoke of as they debate the best way forward for the people of Nebraska. Grant them wisdom to know your holy will for your people. Grant them understanding of one another, especially when ideas and policies differ from their own. Grant them counsel to know what must be done, and grant them strength to stand firm for the good and do what must be done for that good. Grant them knowledge and your insight to the issues before them. Grant them fear of the Lord, a reverence for all that is yours, so that what is enacted in law here may reflect your justice. Finally, Lord, send your blessing and grace upon all gathered here as they begin the work of this day. We ask this in your holy name. Amen.
I recognize Senator Hughes for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Please join me for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I call to order the 43rd day of the 108th Legislature second session. Senators, please record your presence. Roll call. Mr. Clerk, please record.
There's a quorum present, Mr. President.
Are there any corrections for the journal?
I have no corrections for the journal this morning, sir.
Are there any messages, reports, or announcements?
Single item, Mr. President. Senator Brewer, amendment to be printed to LB 1037. That's all I have this morning.
Thank you. Senator Frederickson would like to recognize the physician of the day, Dr. Steve Williams of Omaha. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Senator Slama would like to recognize some guests in the North Balcony from Leadership Nebraska City and Nemaha County Leadership. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Mr. Clerk, please proceed to the first item on the agenda.
Mr. President, the agenda, general file, Legislative Bill 1413. When the legislature left the bill, pending was a motion to indefinitely postpone pursuant to Rule 6, Section 3F from Senator Michaela Cavanaugh.
Senator Clemens, you're recognized for a 1-minute refresh.
Thank you, Mr. President. LB 1413 is the governor's mid-biennium funds transfer bill for the cash reserve and other cash funds. The Appropriations Committee advanced LB 14 to general file with Committee Amendment AM 2698 that we will get to later on a 9-0 vote. And I want to again thank the Appropriations Committee and the Fiscal Office for their hard work on this bill. We've started in January. I'm glad to bring it to the floor. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Clemens. Returning to the queue, Senator DeBoer, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I wasn't able to speak yesterday afternoon as much as I wanted to. This is the actual cash transfers bill. And so this is the one where I will again just draw our attention to the Universal Service Fund, the Nebraska Universal Service Fund, and the fact that we are taking the interest going forward. If that's what this body decides, that's what this body decides, but I want to think through it and talk through it as we're thinking about it. My understanding is the original recommendation was to take some of the, potentially the principal from the NUSF. I will note that that is not something we can do. Something, colleagues, the Supreme Court has decided is that if something is a fee, we cannot use it for general funds. And only if it is a tax can we use it for general funds. So that case has been decided. If we use the interest, that is not going to change it from being a fee into a tax. But if we were to ever use any of the principal of the NUSF fund, that would make it into a tax, not a fee. There's a lot of reasons that we should be concerned about doing that. And so taking the Universal Service Fund and making it into a tax would be problematic. So I thank the Appropriations Committee for not doing that. And I thank the Appropriations Committee for not trying to take any back interest, which I think would get us into murky legal areas. However, they are taking the interest going forward into perpetuity, and this is my concern. While right now, some of what we're using the NUSF for is building out in those areas where we cannot make no business can make a business case for going out there. The astronomical cost of putting fiber out in areas where there aren't a lot of houses is something that really makes folks not want to invest in doing that, particularly because the take rate or the number of folks that they are going to have in those areas may not be enough to actually get them to be able to build out. So at this point, we're using the Universal Service Fund in part for that. But in the long run, what the Universal Service Fund is probably going to have to do is support all of this fiber that we're putting out. Whether we're putting it out through the BEAD program, whether we're putting it out through the bridge, the Broadband Bridge Act, which say that 5 times fast, whatever way we're doing it, right now we're building out at a very rapid pace. The head of the broadband office, the Nebraska Broadband Office, has said to our committee that we will be built out by 29. I hope he's right. I cannot imagine we can get built out that quickly, but we'll at least be a lot further along, which means we're going to have a lot of fiber out in the ground in very rural areas that needs to be maintained. So the Universal Service Fund has traditionally been used to maintain high-cost areas, and that's something that it's going to continue to have to do, and it's going to need to do it much, much more when we get this much, much larger area of fiber in the ground or on the poles. And maintaining that is going to be expensive, and it's something that we're going to have to do going forward in order to keep internet out to all of our folks. So I will caution us all to think very carefully about whether or not what we want to do is in any way diminish a fund that we're going to need to build up, because we're going to need those funds in the future. Again, I will thank the Appropriations Committee for not taking any of the principal, and for understanding that we need to keep that particular fund robust. But I will say that it's something that concerns me, and I hope that we can at least discuss that as we're going forward this morning. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator DeBoer. Senator Blood, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Fellow senators, friends all, what I have to say is going to ring a bell. Right now, I do stand in support of the IPP motion because I think we have some issues that we need to discuss within these transfers. And one of them specifically is in reference to the bill we talked about earlier, which was Senator Reepe's bill, which is the State and Unemployment Trust Fund bill, where they want to shorten the duration of unemployment and then specifically also transfer $60 million to the general fund for property tax relief. So no denying everybody wants property tax relief. That's not the question. Here's the question that I need you to consider. First of all, I was at an event on Friday night, and I had a lot of angry business owners coming up to me and saying, why are we paying special taxes for this fund if somebody's going to use it for a piggy bank? We have a lot of employees who don't own property. Should they be unemployed? And the state right now, which is fiscally sound, were to run out of money, what happens then? Well, what's going to happen then is what's happened in other states. As we discussed on Senator Reepe's bill, the states that shortened the duration of unemployment benefits ended up creating a secondary issue. And that issue was that their coffers, when it came to their trust funds, became depleted. And when those funds became depleted, then they had to go to the federal government to get a loan. I know that everybody is looking at these funds as being surpluses, but anybody that's ever been in government knows that budgets ebb and flow. To believe that all of these funds are going to stay full and that nothing's ever going to happen to them is probably not very sound judgment. We cannot take money from this fund. You're going to have people stand and talk maybe, and maybe not, because some people just want to get this done and vote on it. Talk about how people take advantage of the unemployment that they receive in Nebraska. But if you look at how much people make on unemployment, it is not a living wage. You know for a fact that during the pandemic, we gave out tens of millions of dollars to the Russian mafia. I didn't even see you guys up in arms about that. I brought it to everybody's attention. We had a public hearing on it. I don't see us getting any of that money back, but we're willing to take money from it. So I find that really confusing. We're willing to let bad guys take our money because the cybersecurity at our state is not awesome. And we're willing to allow people to use it as a piggy bank when they can't figure out how to properly lower property taxes. Want to know how to lower property taxes? You do a strategic plan. You plan for the future. You have metrics. You measure what you treasure. You have goals that you meet. We don't do that in Nebraska. I have never seen that done in the last 20 years. But what we do is the Property Tax Relief Fund, where we make you ask for your money back. That's not property tax relief. That's actually kind of a handout, which of course Nebraskans deserve because they're paying too much in property taxes, but we're never really solving the problem. We want to cap things. We want to be a nanny state and take over political subdivisions and tell them what they can and can't do with their funds, which, by the way, we can do because we're Dillon's rural state.
1 minute.
But then that takes away the voices of the people at the local level. But I guess we're okay with that as long as we have property tax relief. Friends, you can wave your flag and say you gave property tax relief, but until you come up with something sustainable and long-term and there is an actual plan, we will never have true property tax relief. We will never have a plan. We will only keep being a piggy bank and have that fund that people need to ask for their money back. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Blood. Senator Conrad, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning, colleagues. I am glad that we have the opportunity to reconvene and continue our debate and deliberations in regards to the budgetary package before us to make mid-biennium budget adjustments. And we spent a great deal of time on the previous bill, which is generally speaking the mainline budget bill, and talking about related components in this measure, 1413, which represents a lot of the more complex and controversial aspects of the budget proposal in regards to sweeps and cash transfers and kind of what that means and why for the overall vision in terms of the budget and the related revenue package. So I want to make sure to reaffirm, and I know that most people who have been involved in the discussions have a lot of clarity in terms of understanding where we are with budgetary negotiations, but it does sound like perhaps maybe some colleagues are confused. This is not a filibuster to filibuster. That is not what's happening at all. This is not a return to last year. That is not what's happening at all. Anybody who's grumbling about that needs to talk to the stakeholders that are actively and in good faith negotiating serious issues related to tourism, related to Special Olympics, related to behavioral health, related to developmental disabilities funding, related to job training, related to water issues. The list goes on and on and on. And indeed, those negotiations do take time. That is pattern and practice with how we have always done things and should do things. So if anybody watching at home or in the lobby or on this floor is confused about what's happening, this has nothing to do with the veto override. This is no sort of signal in regards to a return to filibustering, as was the practice last year. This is serious debate that is also allowing for negotiations to continue off the mic, which is important to bring people together to try and foster consensus on really important issues impacting our state and our districts. And it takes a little bit of time to do that. And it may be boring or it may seem messy, but it's actually helping us with each minute that we spend on the budget bills get closer in those negotiations. It is also a task that is next to impossible to complete in Q&A on the mic. That's why individual senators are taking time to lift up issues that are important to them in their district, to signal that that is critical from the negotiations perspective. But I do want to just preface today's debate in that regard. There is no shift in tone. There is no shift in strategy. This is what a budget debate can and should look like, actually, in the Nebraska Legislature. And once the Appropriations Committee does its hard work to put together a package to advance to the full legislative floor, it no longer is the committee's. It becomes our own. And people have signaled that there are serious issues with some of the big sweeps in this budget.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. A lack of investment in certain areas that are priorities for our state. What that means for the overall bottom line, what that means for the corresponding and correlated tax packages that will soon be working their way through the legislature. So let me be clear, and if you need me to be more clear, I'm happy to visit with anybody off the mic, as I know other negotiators are as well. This isn't filibuster for filibuster's sake. This is a critical budget debate. Each conversation, each moment is moving us closer in terms of understanding the technical and substantive issues. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Senator McKinney, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of the IPP motion and still don't necessarily know where I'm at on LB 1413. Probably a no right now, mainly because multiple reasons, as I stated yesterday, that we have 20 plus cash transfers, and some of them, I think, we're right to have conversations about. When you think about the inequity of funding to rural workforce housing and middle income housing, I think we need to address that issue and at least come to some type of compromise on that particular issue. There's 25 million. Let's just split it in half and call it a day. There still would be inequity, but I don't think we could completely solve that this year, considering it's only 25 million. And I do believe rural and middle deserve some funding. I just believe that both should be funded equally and not one getting 20 million and the other getting 5 million. Just something I disagree with. Also, there's issues around these transfers of these unemployment funds. I don't know why we're taking that much money from the fund, so I would hopefully like a better understanding of that, but also thinking about the other bill that is trying to decrease the amount of weeks people can claim unemployment benefits. When you combine those two, it's very alarming that we're cutting the time somebody could get unemployment benefits, and we're also taking money from the fund. I don't know if that's right. I don't think it's right. I know there's a lot of people with a lot of questions around that because there are industries and individuals that work in the trades, for example, that rely on that, especially when the seasons change and there is no work available. They need to be able to access unemployment benefits. So hopefully somebody will get on the mic eventually and explain why are we taking 70 million from that fund for property tax relief. Well, I think it might be actually 60 for property tax relief, I believe, and another 10 is going to something else. But just in general, we're trying to decrease this year. There's bills to decrease the amount of time somebody can claim unemployment benefits, and we're taking a chunk out of the unemployment fund. I believe the taxpayers deserve an adequate explanation of why that's occurring. So hopefully today, as we take time, we can get some answers on that, but also some answers around, are we gonna equitably fund rural workforce housing and middle income housing? But overall, I think our budget is our moral document. It specifies the priorities that we have as a state and what we deem as important issues. I think property tax issues are important.
1 minute.
But important across the state. But I think it's something that we have to have a contextual conversation about, and that does not mean that we should just be looking to raise funds to do it, because also we're potentially going to have some issues around 2027, 2028, and I'm just concerned about where are we going to get the money if there's an economic downturn, revenue projections aren't what they're supposed to be, all of those things if we're raiding cash funds. So just something to think about, because some people won't be here, but we'll be here and we'll have to deal with that issue. So let's at least talk about it now. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator McKinney. Senator Armendariz, you're next and recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you again for your time today. I want to reinforce that I ran on and I was elected to watch over the taxpayers of this state, and I will continue to do that on the Appropriations Committee. I will be a fiscal hawk over their tax dollars. The sweeps of these accounts, I want to ask a question of anybody that works in the private sector, or if you don't, pretend you do work in the private sector, and your boss gives you $200 to go buy an office chair for your own use. You go, and the office chair ends up costing $170. What do you do with the extra $30? Do you give it back to your organization, or do you go spend it on office supplies because you think you need some office supplies, or they gave you $200, you might as well spend it for your department's use, although it was allocated for an office chair. When agencies come to the Appropriations Committee, they ask specifically for what they need the money for. We allocate them that money. It is not intended to be used as a cash slush fund for them. If it is not being used, and we do look back year over year, how much is being used and how much is accumulating. It is fair to the taxpayer to give them that money back, which we are attempting to do here. The number one issue in this state is taxes. We owe it to the taxpayer to give them their money back, not keep it and try to find another way to use it within that department or within that program. That isn't what it was asked to be used for. Some will say that money has been allocated. There is a difference between money that is allocated and money that is under contract. Anybody that works in the private sector knows that they are allowed a budget and they try to use it by the end of the year or they'll lose it. So they'll allocate it. It isn't necessarily under contract, and they'll carry it over. And oftentimes if they don't have it under contract by the end of the year, they will lose it. So this is a signal to say, if you have been allocated money, you may not hold that money for years with the intent to contract it. Here's what's been happening when they come back to the committee. Well, we got the money, say $70 million to build water treatment facility, and now 3 years later, it costs $110 million. We're going to need more money. We need to contract that money the minute we get it. If there are issues in contracting it in a timely manner, then those issues need to be fixed. We don't just come back and ask for more money. We also need to look at programs that are or are not working. A perfect example is the summer free lunch program that was asked for at the beginning. It was a very contentious issue. Great program, great intent. There are other programs in place. Some of them I used myself as a child that were good programs that got us out of our community and brought us exposure to things we needed to get exposure to. Now, if those programs are being underutilized and we'd rather replace them with this new program, that is fine. We need to go back at the programs that are being underutilized. Arguably, under 20% utilization in programs, why are we keeping them? If we're paying any administrative fees to them, we need to shut them down. We need to spend the money on the new program that we think is better, but we also need to do a look back on the programs that are not working. And we need to do that.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. We need to do that throughout every program and every agency, which we're attempting to do with the audit that is going on now, and we need to let that work. Now, schools are obviously a huge issue, also taxpayer funded. Next time on the mic, I'll talk about the schools and how that is putting too much pressure on the taxpayers at the state and what needs to change in that as well. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Armendariz. Senator Jacobson, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today in support of LB 1413 and just want to add a little color to some of what's been talked about. I think I've made it clear on the mic before that I am concerned about one of the transfers, but I can tell you that the transfer out of the state unemployment fund is not one that I have a concern about, and I'll tell you why. We talked about this earlier, and maybe I should first just say that I appreciate Senator Armendariz's comments. I think she's spot on in terms of what the Appropriations Committee is trying to get done. Many of you know Senator Clements. He and I are both bankers. I can tell you that Senator Clements, you'll be hard pressed to find someone more conservative and more fiscally responsible. And I can tell you that when he delivers this information and this plan, that it is fiscally sound. I know there's a lot of talk about, well, gee, what are we going to do about reserves? Well, we have almost $1 billion in cash reserves after all this gets done. He's also laid out the fact that we're going to see these funds come down from the general fund, going to get down to the point to where we get the end of 27 after the state income tax cuts fully are implemented to the 3.99% upper rate, that then we will start seeing those revenues go back up. That's been baked in the cake. And we have roughly $1 billion in reserves. So we're not running out of funds. If we get a recession, we have reserves. That's been taken care of. These cash fund transfers are simply that. It's really what Senator Armendariz has laid out. I can also tell you that there were a number of other cash funds that were originally targeted, and then they learned as they continued to dig into it, that these were funds that were earmarked for specific needs, that those agencies had held those dollars either because of the pandemic or the need to hire staff and couldn't hire staff. And now we're moving to do so those funds were left alone. So what they've tried to target is those funds that don't need to be there and are truly excess. Let me be abundantly clear on what's happening with the state unemployment fund. That is not a fund that's mandated by the feds. There's a federal unemployment fund that's funded by employees in the state, employers and employees in the state. That's about $550 million. That's more than ample to take us through a recession and have enough dollars. There's about $78 million in the state fund, which has continued to build every year, both in terms of what's being paid in particular. There's also earnings on it, and then those earnings are transferred out to pay for job training, and it goes into that cash fund. So the fact of the matter is that not only do we not need the funds that are currently in that state unemployment fund, we don't need that fund. It's not a mandated fund. It was established probably a decade or so ago to backstop the federal side when we had low reserves on the federal side. That is not the case today. But it is going to take statutory changes to eliminate that, and that's what I intend to do, because I think, as Senator Armendariz laid out, not only do we need to return tax dollars and be frugal of the tax dollars that are coming into the state, but we need to stop collecting taxes that are not needed. Every employee in this state and every employer in this state are paying into SUTA, state unemployment tax. They don't need to be doing that. That's a fund we don't need. And by the way, 60 million of that 70 million transfer was what was coming out at the governor's request. The other 10 million is going into the general fund and being earmarked back for job training. So that's already allocated in the general fund. So I think it's important people understand we're not raiding the fund. This is a fund that doesn't need to be there. And frankly, not only does it not need to be there, it needs to be shut down, and we need to quit funding it. And that's something we need to do next year. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Jacobson. Senator Frederickson, you're next in the queue.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, Nebraskans. I am happy to be here again today, having participating and learning from my colleagues during this debate. You know, I think one of the cool things about the diversity of topics that we debate in here is that you sort of get to learn from all of our colleagues in their different areas of expertise. And so I know I was chatting with Senator Armendariz yesterday. I've been appreciating learning more from her about her expertise in this area, and listening to Senator Jacobson as someone who's worked in the banking industry about unemployment funds. It's always I think nice to sort of learn from each other, and our personal experiences and our backgrounds I think help make us make better policies. So this has been something I've been really enjoying being a part of. I want to reiterate what Senator Conrad was saying earlier, which is that, what's happening today while we're getting on the mic, while we're discussing this, while we're getting into the weeds here, this is not, there's been some rumbling that everything's being filibustered all of a sudden. This is not a filibuster in any way, shape, or form. What's actually happening, as Senator Conrad said earlier, is that there are negotiations that are going on. Legislators are having conversation. And from what I'm understanding is that we're getting closer and closer to what we're actually going to be putting forward from this chamber. And so for folks at home, this is something that you learn when you get into the legislature, and if you observe the legislature, kind of what the budget process looks like. So we're actually in the second year of the biennium. So we passed our 2-year budget last year. This is a adjustment to the budget that we're debating this year. And earlier in the session, the governor's office puts out a proposal of a proposed budget from the executive branch. And then what's happening now is that the appropriations committee here in the legislature puts out the legislative body their suggested tweaks to the budget, so to speak. And so that's what we're talking about here. We're considering what the executive branch's goals are. We're considering what they're hoping to do with the state's budget. But we're also taking into consideration the legislative branch here, and that's the conversation that's happening now. So we're kind of in this final process here. A lot of conversations are happening. We're looking at the different goals, both of the executive branch, but also of the legislative branch, and frankly, as legislators in here, we represent our constituents. So we are most mindful of what are the goals of Nebraskans and our constituents, and that's what we're trying to prioritize and ensure that those things are not left out when we talk about the budget itself. And I'm confident we're going to come to an understanding and an agreement moving forward. Yesterday, I spoke a little bit about the unemployment fund, and Senator Jacobson was making some comments on this. And I think he made a really astute observation that a lot of folks, I think we can kind of underscore, is that our state unemployment fund, that is not mandated. That was originally established as he described, as a backstop, almost like an insurance policy. So what happens if on the federal level we run out of unemployment dollars? This state fund was really an insurance policy to ensure that if Nebraskans were in a situation where they were in need of unemployment funds, that the state was able to continue to provide those. So Nebraska historically has been a very fiscally responsible state. I think that's something we can all be really proud of. And that's something that clearly, with the numbers we're seeing from our state unemployment fund, which is a bit inflated at this time, that's kind of what's leading to all this discussion. I think that some concerns I have about the sweep of that fund are a couple things. One is that this is a fund that businesses have paid into, so large businesses, small businesses, employees have also paid into those as well. So I understand that there are larger goals when it comes to property tax relief. I think that's admirable goal. It's an important goal that we need to address. But I also think that when we consider what the funds were originally intended to and what they were intended for, we have to be mindful of that. Whether that's giving that money back to the business community, whether that's giving money back to the employees who have paid into that fund, but also considering what are the business community's priorities for this year. And if we are in fact going to sweep that fund, is there something we can invest in that's in line with their priorities? Thank you, Mr. President. I understand that there's $10 million of that fund going into job training. That I think certainly is in line with the business community's goals. They are certainly interested in job training. You think about workforce development. I'm going to continue to harp on this childcare. I think we need to invest in our childcare workforce, our childcare providers. This is an opportunity where we are seeing a large number of funds that has actually been listed by the business community as one of their number one priorities for this year. And so when we consider where we're using these funds, that's something that we as a legislature really need to keep in mind with that. I will continue to listen to the debate and appreciate the conversation that's happening here. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Frederickson. Mr. Clerk, for items.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Committee on Banking, chaired by Senator Slama, reports Legislative Bill 446 to general file with committee amendments. Additionally, a series of motions from Senator Michaela Cavanaugh to LB 937. Those will be printed in the journal. And notice that the Revenue Committee will be holding an executive session in room 2022 at 10 o'clock a.m. Revenue Committee executive session 2022 at 10 o'clock. That's all I have this time, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Senator Blood, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Fellow senators, friends all. I still stand in support of the IPP motion because I still am hoping that there are some of you that are listening to the words that I am saying. Federal law says that all money withdrawn from the unemployment fund of the state shall be used solely in the payment of unemployment compensation. Again, federal law says all money withdrawn from the unemployment fund of the state shall be used solely in the payment of unemployment compensation, not for tax relief. Everybody's looking down, so I know how you're going to vote already on this. But what I don't see is us adjusting the employer tax rates. If we're so thrilled that we have a surplus that we think we need to move on because we don't need that money, why did we take the money in the first place? And you should know, too, that fewer than half of the people that are unemployed actually receive any help because they're out looking for jobs. But what I always remember is that the Federal Reserve, and I can't remember who said it, so I can't quote the person, but it was somebody at the Federal Reserve, and they once said that unemployment rises like a rocket, but it falls like a feather. And what they're talking about is like when we're in recession. So when recession starts, companies look for ways to manage slowing down the demand for goods and services, and they need to cut corners and they need to save money to get through the recession. So the next move is to lay off the workers or fire the workers. And so that means fewer funds are going into the unemployment fund, less money, and more people are going to be utilizing it. This reminds me of the silver tsunami that everybody talked about, right? Oh my gosh, there's going to be a silver tsunami in 20 years and we better do something about it because what's going to happen is fewer people are going to be paying into into Social Security, and more people will be using it. And what did we do for 20 years? Absolutely nothing. And now they want to take that away from you, or take it away as you know it. And they want you to wait until you're after 70 to use it, after paying into it for 4, 5, 6 decades. This is the same kind of thing. I don't understand why we think it's okay to create messes for future legislatures. Why is that okay? So unemployment usually peaks long after the recession. We saw that especially with COVID. And it's over when the economic contraction hits bottom and it starts to rebound. But long-term recession does other things. It damages public health and our economy. When it comes to long-time production potential. And again, we saw that for a while with the pandemic. And yes, there are stabilizers that kick in and help us out. I understand that from the federal government. But I was listening to Senator Armendariz, and I actually disagree with some of what she said. I don't think you can compare taking fees, tax money, that the federal government says that we can only use for unemployment and compare that with the office chair. That the money was spent for something else. That's not one of these cases. And again, taking money from funds to balance a budget or front loading a budget tells me that there's not a long-term plan for this budget. And we have done that for as long as I've been in this body. And we can stand up on the mic today and we can justify it. But it's not a good way
1 minute.
to deal with taxpayer dollars. I know that we always talk about taxes and that we're going to be good overseers of tax dollars. And I think we've done a very good job of it. A really good example is the first 2 years we were in the body, my class, because we passed so much good legislation with zero fiscal notes. And we were able to get the state of Nebraska out of a very big hole. But I don't understand this money grabbing when we can't figure out creative ways to actually take care of property taxes. Why can't we find a long-term solution? Why are we always doing short-term solutions? And why do we always wave our flag and say how awesome we are that we lowered property taxes when that's not what's actually happening in our communities? Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Blood. Senator Lowe, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. I stand in support of 1413 and opposed to 1247. I think the Appropriations Committee did a pretty good job, even though I'm worried about the funds that go to tourism. I hope that we're able to still fund that. But the other day, Tuesday evening, was an evening that 3 senators got to partake in, Senator Holdcroft, Senator Ibon, myself. We went to DUI court graduation for Lancaster County, and there were 7 individuals there that were going to graduate that evening. They also had an individual who had graduated, I believe, in the first class. And he came to speak, and he spoke pretty well about how it changed not only his life, but his family's life. Then there were, they showed a series of videos of each one of the graduates, and they showed the families and the friends of these 7 individuals on how this process has changed their lives for the better. They have to be tested twice a day, once in the morning and once in the evening. They have to maintain a job, and they can't get in any trouble. It's a success story, even though there were only 7 of them this year. But that's 7 who were not spending the nights in jail and were able to go back to work and pay taxes. That's a good thing. I mean, it truly changed their lives. The DUI court is specifically designed to supervise eligible participants who have been charged with a felony, 3rd or 4th offense DUI, or 4th offense refusal of chemical test. And I spoke to one of the individuals afterwards, and spoke with another officer of the court. And he said that one of the individuals rode his bike to work every day and across Lincoln because he's not originally from Nebraska. But he was here, and that's where he had to serve this court. And he did that all through January of this year. Anybody remember what the weather was like in January? And he rode his bike, and he showed up for every test, and he made it. That's incredible. This is a success story, and I think we need to be doing more of this across the state. And I commend Lancaster County and the Supreme Court for offering something like this. I'd like to yield the rest of my time to Senator Halloran.
Thank you, Senator Lowe. Senator Halloran, you have 1 minute, 45 seconds.
Well, thank you, Senator Lowe. I appreciate that courtesy to yield me all that time. And to be brief, I'm going to yield my time back to the chair.
Thank you, Senator Halloran. Senator Doran, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor. Thank you for some of the conversation. Thank you for Senator Armendariz getting up and basically explaining some of the philosophy or some of the thoughts behind the dollars that are sitting out there, and some of the discussion that, quite frankly, we had some frank discussion in appropriations. I really appreciate that. Thank Senator Jacobson for making some of the comments he made about some of his stuff and everybody else. Yesterday, when I was listening, somebody talked on the mic and talked about, I call it our long-term, not planning our long-term revenue and our long-term appropriations, what they might look like. And Senator Waltz did pass this out. This comes from the legislative fiscal staff. It's a 2023 Nebraska long-term budget planning report. Every 4 years, they need to put this out. I believe everybody got this on their desk. I hope people have taken the time to look at this. This has some different things in it. Not different things. We talked last year, Senator Linehan talked about this report has a methodology to it that there's certain percentages that are longer term plugged in, and there are certain percentages in our revenue increase, also certain percentages in our appropriations, how we would have those going forward. It shows that for a certain period of years here, we're going to have a 4% revenue growth and then a 4.5%, and it averages in the 4.5%, and how they use that for different years, and what our fiscal financial, the general fund financial status looks like. And I think everybody should really look at that, because it goes through the years 38, 39, using that methodology where they are those 4.5% growth, a 2.5% roughly percent. It explains that later on in this book, 2.5% growth somewhat in appropriations. I want people to understand that this isn't just a methodology pulled out of the numbers pulled out of the air. These are numbers that have been historic numbers as far as revenue. The appropriations now, they have lowered those because the last few years, the budget, when Governor Ricketts was here, now Governor Pillen, we've been down in that 2 to 3% growth in appropriations. But it shows some things that in the general fund status that I call it above excess shortfall above the minimum reserve. When you go out there in the year 2030 and 2031, we're not excess above the minimum reserve. We're $1.6 billion under it or whatever. So there's some very interesting charts, some very interesting data in here. On page 5 was, I think people also need to be aware of, it gives some projections of what our property tax credit fund is going to look like, what that's going to grow over the years. Also that we're going to put $250 million a year into the Education Future Fund, way into the future. Then on the next page, it shows a little bit and explains a little bit about the growth in the different programs. And these are more compared to what we've had the last few years as versus the historic 40-year growth. But it gives a lot of information and a lot of data. And as we talk about the budget this year, and as we talk about the budget in future years, this shows some of the data of what could be expected under normal circumstances. Now, it also says that these are guidelines. These are not exact data. But I also want people to know on page 8, I call it our cash reserve fund. That continues to grow. We're at $858 million here
1 minute
at the start of the year. Thank you. It grows to $1.3 billion and stuff. But I think the last page, page 2, read the last page of the program. Read the conclusion, because I think it says the broad range of policy changes that have recently been enacted make this even more of a challenging exercise of coming up with these numbers, and one which is an average. For revenue expenditures, they may vary in the future, very different from what has historically been in the past. But I hope people take time to look at this and look at some of that data and some of that information. It was very interesting to see this is the kind of information that we need as we do long-range planning here for the legislature, and we don't always do good long-range planning, but it's some of the data that we need to look at so that we can make some of those decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Dorn. Senator Bozen has some guests in the north balcony. Fourth graders from Lincoln Christian in Lincoln, please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Senator Armendariz, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. No, there's a lot of conversation around the state unemployment tax, insurance tax, so I'd like to address that. Senator Blood is correct in that that is different than the analogy I used earlier in the office chair and reallocating the leftover money to something else that a particular person, or in this case, agency or program, think they need, without prior approval for reallocating those funds. This fund is different. It's collected by business owners, from business owners to put in this fund. This fund has been collecting money, being unused for a long period of time now, and has grown to a significant amount. I am somewhat shocked that previous legislatures, previous appropriations committees did not catch this before. I'm glad now we are shining light on it, and several people in this body have told the lobby that would like to keep it or redistribute it back to the business owners that they will bring bills, and I hope they do, to eliminate this. This is an optional collection from the state. It has been stated that the federal funds we get are more than enough money, even in a downturn. I would propose that we stop collecting it from these business owners, and maybe just a modest amount, just in case we overflow the federal, or the federal doesn't reimburse us at the level that we need. But we really need to look at this. So I'm glad that we are looking at all of these funds and shining light on it right now, because people are paying attention. I would encourage every legislator to take one of these agencies, one of these programs, and help them figure out how to more efficiently spend or use their money, because there are a lot of issues with being able to capture the funds to spend them. And there's also ways that we can reduce the collection of either the fees or the taxes that we're collecting from the taxpayers. So we as legislators should go into those agencies, into those programs, to figure out how to more efficiently have them run. I'm glad we're going through this exercise and shining a light on it. It needs to be addressed instead of ignored. Now, as I said, I would bring up schools, also a big tax collection, and arguably the one that we're talking about this year, property taxes. In my area, I legislate over our largest school district, as well as one that is taxed, arguably one of the highest property taxes in the state, just under, I believe, Gretna now, who also is extremely highly taxed. Oftentimes people pick places to live because of the schools. And when you have an extremely large school district that is underperforming, and there is no argument that it is underperforming, it is in severe need of restructure, bringing up the performance of that school district that serves over 50,000 students. And people are fleeing the area because the school is not functioning properly. When they flee to places like Bennington, that is also in my district, the Bennington School District is bursting at the seams, and they're asking their taxpayers to pay even more to build more and more and more schools. What is happening to the schools that are being fled? Well, we're told that they need to still function at 100% as well. We are not growing the state by that much.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. We need to find a solution. We are spending way too many of our taxpayers' dollars on things that are not working. And we as legislators need to go into every single program to get them working. It is an injustice to the kids that are coming out of these school districts at very low reading and math proficiency levels. Where are those kids going to find employment if they can't read and do math? It is injustice to those kids. And oftentimes we think way too much about the adults that are involved in the school district more than the kids. These districts are formed because of the children of this state, and they should be running optimally. Our taxpayers deserve that. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Armendariz. Senator Erdman, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning. So as I said and listened to the debate and I think about why we're doing this, I have concluded that this is just to take time. So in that regard, I want to speak about an amendment that was just dropped on 1412 on select file. It's an amendment to change an appropriation that we, the Appropriations Committee, made to Game and Parks to restore a lake at Fort Robinson. And so Game and Parks wants to change that designation from enhancing the lake to removal of the dam and draining the lake and restoring Soldier Creek. So now that we're speaking about lakes, generally lakes have fish in them. And I was wondering if Senator Wayne would yield to a question.
Yes.
Senator Wayne, would you yield to a question?
Yes.
Senator Wayne, you and I have had several comments and conversations about fishing. Is that correct?
Yes, I am the fish whisperer.
And it is also true that you and I and several others are going to go fishing this summer. Is that correct?
Correct. We're going to go fishing and we're going to catch some large ones, except from probably Mr. Baker. I heard he doesn't really catch a lot of fishes.
You were sharing with me when we first discussed fishing that you had a special ability. Can you share with us what that ability is?
Yeah, so I'm a fish whisperer, and so normally I don't use live bait. I usually I like my own top water lures or whatever. But lately I've been able to just put my hand in the water and make some calls, and the fish just come running to me. So I have been designated as the fish whisperer. I can just stand on the shore and it's just let them like spirit fingers. You just kind of let it go and you kind of say some words and they run up. It's amazing. It worked out at Fort Robinson. I caught some trout out there.
Yeah, I seen that. So do you have to be in a boat to do that?
No, I can. It's better from the boat. You get larger fish, like your whole hand will go in their mouth. But when you're on the shore, they just kind of grab the fingers when you do this fish whispering.
So would it be appropriate if you and I were on the same vessel on the lake that you could show me how to do that and bring them into the boat?
You use the word vessel, so I get a little nervous because I don't know where we're going. But if we're in a boat, I can show you how to do it. It's real easy. It's just some magic words.
All right, good. Well, I appreciate it. Thank you for answering that question. So I have a bit of time left. I would yield that to Senator Michaela Cavanaugh. Thank you.
Senator Cavanaugh, you have 2 minutes, 20 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Erdman. I think people are like, why are you yielding time to Senator Cavanaugh? I would like to pull my IPP motion. Thank you.
Without objection, so ordered. Mr. Clerk, for an item.
Mr. President, Legislative Bill 1413, General File. Introduced by Speaker Archer at the request of the Governor, it's a bill for enacting the funds. Transfers and provides for the transfer of funds, creates a fund, changes the use and distribution of funds, harmonized provisions, repeals the original section, declares an emergency. Bill was read for the first time on January 18th of this year and referred to the Appropriations Committee. That committee placed the bill on general file with committee amendments, Mr. President.
Senator Clemens, you're welcome to open on the committee amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was a little surprised that I'm getting to do this so soon, but fortunately I had my notes handy. AM 2698, the committee amendment, is a white copy amendment which contains the Appropriation Committee's recommendations after reviewing the governor's proposals in the bill as shown in his January Gold Book. The governor proposed to transfer a number of cash funds to the general fund for a total of $273.8 million, as shown on page 11 of the Gold Book. These transfers are in coordination with the governor's property tax package, is what my understanding is. The committee amendment, shown on page 19 in the Shamrock Green Book, includes just $244.8 million of those cash fund transfers, a $29 million net decrease. As the committee reviewed those, and there's been a lot of discussion about those transfers, we did find some that we felt were not appropriate. The LB 1413 committee statement also describes these transfers. 11 of the governor's proposed transfers were not adopted into AM 2698 for that $29 million decrease. 3 are reduced by a combined total of $6 million. I'll highlight some of the main changes. The securities cash fund transfer is increased by $4 million, while the banking and finance fund transfer is lowered by $4 million, allowing for wage increases in the Department of Banking to address frequent turnover of bank examiners. The state unemployment fund transfer was increased by $10 million to $70 million, since this fund has not been used at all for the last 5 years, still leaving over $12 million in the fund. No transfers are included from the Game and Parks Habitat and Game funds. These funds are restricted by federal matching grant regulations, so they were not taking it all. Just we've had a lot of conversation and emails regarding transfers out of this Game Fund and Habitat Fund, and we listened to those, and we talked to the director of Game and Parks, and he agreed that it would hurt ability to get federal matching grants, so that was eliminated. The transfer of interest from Public Service Commission Universal Service Fund of $13,250,000 was not included. Only the excess future interest of about $2 million is transferred in fiscal year 2025. The transfer of universal service interest of $1,275,000 in fiscal year 24 and $1,445,000 in fiscal year 25 for the 211 relay information system is still included. The AM 2698 also transfers $5 million from the State Visitor Promotion Lodging Tax Fund, leaving $1.6 million in the fund. This provides $5 million in general funds for the governor's state marketing campaign proposal. The committee reviewed the $100 million JEDI Cash Fund, which is the Eastern Nebraska Flooding and Lake Project Fund from the Star Wars project. A transfer of $50 million is made to the Department of Transportation for roads projects, and $28 million returns to the State Cash Reserve Fund. This leaves $23 million for natural resource flood grants to Saunders and Colfax counties, and earmarks up to $6 million for a Lake I-80 feasibility study. There are some additional bills in AM 2698 that were not in LB 1412 as follows. These are listed in the table on page 4 and are listed in the committee statement. LB 975 from Senator Ibaugh provides no new funds, but expands the use of shovel-ready funds to multifunctional community facilities. LB 1233 from Senator Wayne provides no new funds. It creates the Museum Construction Fund for Game and Parks for a Standing Bear Museum in consultation with the Ponca tribe. It gives $15,750,000 of interest from the Perkins Canal Fund. LB 1245 from Senator McDonald provides no new funds. It allows up to 20% of the lead service line fund to be used for training facilities and labor costs. LB 1333 from Senator Vargas provides no new funds. It increases the maximum allowable grants from existing funds under the Business Innovation Act to $150,000 for Phase 1 and $300,000 for Phase 2 projects. It allows a project to qualify more often as well. LB 1352 from Senator DeBoer requires that only the Nebraska Auditor of Public Accounts shall do the statewide single audit for federal funds. It is important that an independent audit be performed to make sure the federal funds are being spent properly. LB 1407 from Senator Sanders provides no new funds. It changes the name to the Military Installation Support Fund and allows for its use off the base and allows for public matching funds, which were not allowed previously. AM 2698 to LB 1413 also deals with the Cash Reserve Fund. Page 6 of the Shamrock Green Book shows the transfers in and out of the cash reserve over the biennium. Most of those transfers were from the 2023 biennial budget. I've previously described the new items. The ending balance of $904 million in the cash reserve is up from $891.6 million in the governor's proposal. Again, the forecasting board met February 29th, increasing our budget projection by $50 million. This results in an estimated transfer of $39 million into the cash reserve at fiscal year-end 2025. This will put the reserve at 16.6% of annual expenses, which is our target funding level. Those are the highlights of AM 2698. I encourage the body to review the committee statement for more details, and the Green Book has more details on each of those items. Thank you, Mr. President. I ask for your green vote on AM 2698.
Thank you, Senator Clemens. Senator Dover would like to recognize guests in the North Balcony, 48 fourth graders from Jefferson Elementary in Norfolk. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Mr. Clerk, for amendments.
Mr. President, Senator Michaela Cavanaugh would move to amend the committee amendments with FA 254.
Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to open.
Thank you, Mr. President. I need to look at which one this is. Sorry, I wasn't expecting to come up so quickly. This is a substantive amendment, however, I know that, but I did submit a few substantive changes. Mr. Clerk, what was the AM number? It's not on the board yet.
Senator Cavanaugh, FA 254, strikes line 25, page 48, AM 2698, and replaced with on June 30th, 2025.
Thank you. Okay, so this is the amendment to strike the language for the Universal Service Fund to be permanent. So it doesn't strike taking the money from the Universal Service Fund. It just strikes the language that makes it a permanent annual transfer, because it's the budget and we cannot obligate funds in the future through the budget. We have to do that through statutory change. So you're going to see this in most of my amendments. We can talk on them or we can go through them quickly. I think I have quite a few. So they're all going to be in a similar vein. I encourage everyone to vote green for my amendment. And while I have you, I did share, and if you haven't gotten one yet, I will come by and give you a pin from the President of the Irish Senate, Mark Daly, who many of you know. And so I wanted to share with you the note that was sent with it about the pin. So this is Thomas Mager, Irish patriot, U.S. Army General and Governor of Montana in 1848. The white in the center signifies lasting truth between orange and green. I trust that beneath its folds, the hands of the Irish Catholic and the Irish Protestant may be clasped in generous and heroic brotherhood. And is this foundation that makes the pins is mission is promoting pride and respect for the Irish flag and its true meaning for peace, recognizing and celebrating the new and more inclusive Ireland. So, as we are all mostly wearing green today in recognition of our relationship with Ireland and Irish heritage, I thought I would just share that with you all. And again, FA 254 strikes the permanent transfer of funds out of the Universal Service Fund excess fund. It does not strike the transfer this year. It just strikes the future transfers, as we should put those in statute, not do that through the budget. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Clemens, you're recognized to speak. Senator Clemens, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was just having a discussion about the topic I wanted to bring up. There's been discussion about the state unemployment tax question, and it's the transfer fund. From the governor's office, I received a copy of an email. Director John Albin emailed the Federal Department of Labor and gave them a heads up, talking about this LB 1413 transfer. And Mr. Albin said to him, notwithstanding the somewhat misleading title, the State Unemployment Trust Fund is a state cash fund, does not contain any contributions or funds that are a part of Nebraska's state account in the Federal Unemployment Trust Fund or Section 904 of the Social Security Act. Nebraska Department of Labor has a longstanding cost-sharing agreement with the U.S. Department of Labor, recognizing the State Unemployment Trust Fund as a state fund. The cost-sharing plan is included in Nebraska's U.S. Department of Labor approved cost allocation plan. That was the highlights of what he sent to the Federal Department of Labor. A man, Mr. Hudson from the DOL.gov, replied to him, "We have reviewed the follow-up response regarding LB 1413. We accept the explanation that the transfer of from the 60 million at that time from the State Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund to the general fund does not raise a conformity issue with the withdrawal standard, since the funds in that account come from the portion of the combined unemployment insurance tax rate that is a state-funded account, separate from the portion of the combined tax rate that is experience rated and subject to the withdrawal standard. The state separately accounts for these funds and has a cost allocation plan in place. Therefore, we agree there is no conformity issue with that part of the bill." And so that was a email, let's see, this is February 1st. There was a date on this that the Nebraska Department of Labor made sure with Federal U.S. Department of Labor that this provision in LB 1413 was not going to cause a problem. And from the U.S. Department of Labor, they're saying they don't have an issue with this transfer. The committee did change the transfer from 60 million to 70 million because no funds have been used out of it for a long time. And it still leaves I think it was $22 million remaining balance in that fund. And it results in, if you look at the financial status we've been looking at with $68 million in the out years available, if you subtract $70 million from this transfer, you'll make this $68 million in year 2027 a negative $2 million, which in effect would eliminate any money to the floor for A bills. And that's my opinion. But that's the number that we've been using for what's available for A bills was the out year balance. And so I support maintaining the unemployment trust fund transfer.
1 minute.
As approved by the Nebraska Department of Labor. The director in the hearing did not object to it, and now the Federal Department of Labor has also told him they're not. It's not a violation of their other provisions. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Clemens. Senator Jacobson, you're recognized to speak.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. I think Senator Clemens stole my thunder in terms of getting once again clear on why this state unemployment insurance fund can indeed be used for what is intended by the Appropriations Committee. I remain in full support of that. I've got an amendment coming up again on tourism, and I'm going to maybe make a couple of points now with regard to my amendment that will be coming up on this bill with regard to the $5 million being targeted to move out of their fund to DED. My understanding is that money would go to DED to be used for recruiting businesses and retaining businesses in the state of Nebraska. But the tourism fund is funded by occupation taxes by hotels and motels across the state, along with Airbnbs. This money is then divided and goes to your local counties to do their local programs, and to the state tourism board, who uses that for statewide tourism to attract tourists to Nebraska. So when you look at programs like Nebraska Land Days in North Platte, when you look at bringing people to Kearney, to Lincoln, to Omaha, to events in this state, those dollars are earmarked for tourism, and it's paid for by the motels who collect this occupation tax because those tourists are coming here. The two programs are completely unrelated, and we should not be taking tourism dollars to fund business recruitment with dollars that are coming from a fund that results from tourism, tourists coming to the state and staying in hotels and motels. So that's why I'm adamantly opposed to that transfer occurring, and I've got an amendment coming up on this bill that would stop that transfer. Beyond that, I'm fine with what the Appropriations Committee has brought. I think it's been well thought out. I think they've been surgical in terms of how they've taken money from certain funds and left it in others. So that would be my concern, Mr. President. I also just wanted to take a moment to tell everyone, too, that Senator Conrad got up earlier and made a comment about that we're not filibustering. There's not a filibuster going on here. This is a big deal when we start talking about budget bill, cash transfer bill, and a bill yet to come up, which would be the bill dealing with any other claims. These are important bills that need to be discussed, need to be debated. So this has been thoughtful debate. And I will tell you that I think everyone here is genuine in their interest in terms of having robust debate about big dollars that impact our state. And so I compliment Senator Conrad for noting that and playing a role in that, and Senator Kavanaugh and what she's done in terms of that. And obviously, I really appreciate Senator Clements, who knows the numbers inside and out. Anytime I've got a question on those numbers, I go to Senator Clements, and if he doesn't have it, he's going to get it for me, and he knows where it's at. So I do feel very good about where we are at this point in the session. I feel very good about what's been brought by the Appropriations Committee. If not but for this one $5 million transfer, I'm on board. So with that, thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Jacobson. Senator Aguilar, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support as well as LB 1413. And wholeheartedly agree with what Senator Jacobson just expressed. Our tourism departments and their marketing departments go out of their way to get vehicles off the interstate into our smaller communities where they bring their dollars, and the payback on that is more than twofold. We get money back coming into our hotels and stuff, and it comes back, portion of that goes back to the state as well. So I adamantly support what he was saying and arguing for, and I hope that money stays where it's at. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Aguilar. Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, this is my first time talking today, and I've kind of been staying out of it. And I know a lot of folks have been saying this is, we're having an actual conversation, not a filibuster. And so I wanted to push in because when you see a floor amendment, sometimes when it has M. Kavanaugh next to it, folks kind of tune out. And the conversation has been about a few other issues folks have with this bill, but there was nobody else in the queue. And I just wanted, a couple of times this year, we've had votes where people weren't quite dialed in and they said, oh, I would have voted differently if I had maybe caught what you guys were talking about. So I just wanted to raise the flag to everybody and say, this is a serious amendment, a serious conversation. This amendment would strike, get a little bit quieter in here. This amendment would strike the forward-going language out of the white copy amendment. So what the Appropriations Committee did in this amendment, the governor asked to take money out of the Universal Services Fund and then asked to take money going into the future as well. And the Appropriations Committee, and my understanding is, if you look in the Gold Book on page 55, said no to a large transfer out of it, which I give them credit for, but did say we're going to transfer $2 million in FY 2025, and then we're going to transfer that same amount going forward. And so what the other Senator Kavanaugh is saying here is you can still do that transfer in 2025 of $2 million, but going forward, we should make that determination every year in the cash transfers and the budget. So it just strikes the going forward language and still keeps the current transfer and says if this fund continues to have a high balance, as we maybe expect that it will, we can do that on a year-by-year basis and make that determination. So what she's saying is we shouldn't make in the budget a permanent transfer, ongoing transfers of money. We should make the transfer this one time, and then if we want to make it again, do it at that time. So this is a serious conversation. Few folks have now punched in, and I hope we maybe focus the conversation on that before we get to a vote so people know what we're voting on. But this is not going to change the funding for this year in this budget. It might change years down the road, but we could, of course, make the same transfer when we decide to make it. So I would encourage your green vote on FA 254. But like I said, I did have an opportunity to talk to Senator Clements about this, and I appreciate the work they did do to change the ask in this. But I do think we should make that determination on a yearly basis going forward and not just make it forever now. So I support FA 254. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Frederickson would like to recognize guests under the north balcony. They are Joanne Nickerson, Corey Reed, Kelly Sass, Lindy Kessler, Nick Sass, Audrey Kessler, and Ashley DeBose. Please stand and be recognized. Senator Brandt, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I'd like to thank Senator Kavanaugh, who has served on Transportation Committee for 6 years. And she is a very good watchdog on what's going on. The floor amendment is a very good floor amendment. This affects the Nebraska Universal Service Fund. What the Nebraska Universal Service Fund is funded by surcharges on cell phones, and it is used to build out in rural areas. It is a great program, and I'm going to be a little cute here. It's probably the one program where urban people contribute more money to help the rurals as opposed to most of the programs that go the other way in here. What AM 2698 would do is it would sweep the interest from the account going forward. Now there's 11.2 million. They will get that regardless of the floor amendment, but there's $2 million every year. What FA 254 says is this is one and done. From here on out, the $2 million stays in the Nebraska Universal Service Fund, which is used to build out to rural infrastructure to get more of our kids and people out there in rural Nebraska connected to robust broadband. So thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. I think I would hope the Transportation Committee is all on board with this. This is really a good catch. The floor amendment is very simple, and basically it says, yes, they can sweep the 11.2 that's already in the account, but they can't touch the $2 million a year going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Brandt. Senator Bostman, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, Nebraska. Good morning, colleagues. I do want to echo the support for FA 254 for Senator Michaela Kavanaugh. The USF funds are very, very important to the upkeep maintenance of our facilities, the broadband facilities, the fiber, that's being built out into the future. We have a lot of needs that are going to be met here with the build outs through the programs that we have. Then we need to have the funding available then to maintain continued support for those facilities that are being built, those systems that are being built out there. This is perhaps part of what was being done before is a message to the Public Service Commission that we need to expend those funds. Those funds that exist, they need to be utilized the best we can to support those networks that are out there that need to be supported. We do this for a year. PSC, pay attention, because this body can take those funds into the future. But I think the 1 year and then end it after this year for that interest is very important. With that, I do support and would ask for your green vote for FA 254 and then AM 2698 and the underlying bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Bostman. Seeing no one else in the queue, Senator Kavanaugh, you're recognized to close on the floor amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you to my fellow committee members on Transportation and Telecommunications, Senator Bosselman and Senator Brandt, for your support of this amendment. Again, FA 254 strikes the language of making the cash transfer permanent. We should not obligate future legislatures through the budget. If we want to make this permanent, we need to do that through the normal legislative process. This doesn't mean that next year we can't come back and say we're going to do this cash transfer. We can do this cash transfer every year if the body so chooses, but this removes the permanency. It does not stop us from the cash transfer this year. So please, colleagues, vote green for FA 254. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Members, the question is the adoption of floor amendment 254. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. There's been a request to place the House under call. The question is, shall the House go under call? All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
13 ayes, 4 nays, place House under call, Mr. President.
The House is under call. Senators, please record your presence. Those unexcused senators outside the chamber, please return to the chamber and record your presence. All unauthorized personnel, please leave the floor. The House is under call. Senators Wishart, Kauth, McKinney, Slama, Bostar, please please return to the chamber and record your presence. The House is under call. Senators Wishart and McKinney and Slama, please return to the chamber and record your presence. The House is under call. We're lacking Senator Slama. Senator Kavanaugh, may we proceed?
Yes.
Thank you. Senator, the vote was open. Will you accept call-ins?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Clerk. We're now accepting call-ins.
Senator Clements voting no. Senator Linehan voting yes. Senator McKinney voting yes. Senator Conrad voting yes. Senator Slama voting yes. Senator Mosier voting yes. Senator Ballard voting yes. Senator Von Gillern voting yes. Senator Hansen voting yes. Senator Holleran voting yes. Senator McDonald voting no. Senator Dorn voting no. Senator Lippincott voting no. Senator Kauth voting no. Senator Bostar voting yes. Senator Dover voting no. Senator Wishart voting no. Senator Ibob voting no. Senator Vargas voting no. Senator Boston voting no. Senator DeKay voting no.
Record, Mr. Clerk.
Vote is 30 yeas, 12 nays, Mr. President, on adoption of the amendment.
The amendment is adopted. I raise the call. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, Senator Conrad would move to amend the committee amendments with FA 285.
Senator Conrad, you're recognized to open.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I'm pleased to bring forward Floor Amendment 285. This amendment was brought forward in consultation and cooperation with Nebraska business leaders from the State Chamber of Commerce, the Lincoln Chamber of Commerce, the Omaha Chamber of Commerce, and the Nebraska Federation of Independent Businesses. They first flagged this at the committee level and are asking the body to revisit these issues as we make the budget our own through this deliberative process. I also want to note that in addition to the strong support and advocacy from the business community, this is one of those issues and one of those moments where you find an incredible diversity of interests and voices come together to support the same goal. And the business leaders, both big and small, representing both large and small businesses, are joined by the leading voices in the Nebraska labor movement as well. People like Sue Martin representing working men and women and unions all across Nebraska. So this, as you all well know, frequently unions and business interests can be at odds in the political arena for a variety of different purposes. But when those divergent interests coalesce around a common issue and a common goal, that's when I think it is very interesting and very powerful and very important that we pay attention to that. And this is why these various groups are coming together to ask us to revisit and to strike the components in the cash transfer aspects of the budget before us in LB 1413 that have, I believe, impermissibly swept millions of dollars from our state unemployment insurance trust fund. And let me be clear again, it is a trust fund. This is not a garden variety cash fund where sometimes you see fungibility or movement of different revenues for different purposes. This, by its legislative history and the plain language of the statute which authorizes such, ensures that the funds paid into this by employers are solely to be held in trust. They are to be held in trust for the payment of unemployment insurance benefits, period. Look no further than Nebraska Revised Statute 48-622.01, which gives a great overview of what this program is and how it works. So we'll have plenty of opportunities to go deeper into the debate about what the program is and how it's meant to work. But I can tell you this is a critical component of our safety net program to guard against periods of recession or economic turndown. The reason that this fund has a high balance is because that's by design, colleagues. It specifically was crafted by an incredibly diverse set of senators back in the early 90s with support of business and labor to say we're basically going to create a trust fund, a rainy day fund for those downturn periods so that we don't have runs on our unemployment benefits otherwise. And then additionally, some of the interest and funds from that trust fund will also be devoted and earmarked and utilized for job training, which again is one of those areas where we find a coalescence of consensus amongst business groups and labor groups. Additionally, we started to talk about it a little bit yesterday, the funds that are available for job training and that would have fidelity to the statutory authority for this fund are not going out to the business community for job training as they have been requested. So there are perhaps some high balances in components of this fund, but that's by design and because the job training dollars aren't going out as requested and as intended. I have had an opportunity to talk with a lot of you on the floor about this issue, and I think that there is a great deal of concern about authorizing this sweep from a trust fund that was paid into by employers to support our unemployment insurance fund and job training as a secondary policy goal. The small businesses I have talked to who are involved in this debate, the larger businesses I have talked to who are involved in this debate are very frustrated that this is even being presented at this point in time. These funds were paid in for a specific purpose. They are statutorily held in trust And words have meaning, colleagues. They are held in trust for unemployment purposes and job training purposes. It is wrong, perhaps from a legal perspective, but definitely from a policy and political perspective, to somehow erase that legislative history, erase that statutory language, and sweep these funds for whatever intended purposes that are being put forward. We can and we should have a debate about how to fund key aspects in our budget, how to ensure any tax packages are fiscally sustainable, but we cannot and we should not balance our budget on the backs of not only those who can least afford it, as we've talked about with developmental disabilities funding, public assistance funding, and other matters, but we also shouldn't raid funds that were specifically paid in over a period of time for unemployment purposes and for job training purposes. These are trust funds that should not be raided for any other purpose. I'm asking you to support the floor amendment so that we can ensure fidelity to this program as it was intended. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Senator Armendariz has guests in both balconies, students, teachers, and parents of fourth graders, Heritage Elementary in Bennington. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Senator Clemens, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I stand opposed to FA 285. The Appropriations Committee unanimously voted to do this transfer. And we in committee heard from the Director Albin of the Nebraska Department of Labor, who assured us that it was a proper transfer. Excuse me. Just a little bit ago, I read from an email. Director Albin sent an email to the federal U.S. Department of Labor and telling them, talking about whether there was an issue with LB 1413, and this transfer at that time was at $60 million. And he said the state unemployment trust fund is a state cash fund. It does not contain any contribution or funds that are part of a Nebraska state account in the federal unemployment trust fund. The state keeps the federal separate. They separately keep federal unemployment trust fund, which I agree cannot be properly transferred for this purpose. Nebraska has a separate state unemployment trust fund. The reply he received from Mr. Hudson at U.S. Department of Labor said, "We have reviewed the follow-up response regarding LB 1413. We accept the explanation that the transfer from the state unemployment trust fund to the general fund does not raise a conformity issue with the withdrawal standard, since the funds in that account come from the portion of the combined unemployment tax rate that is a state-funded account, separate from the portion that is in the federal account. Therefore, we agree there is no issue with that part of the bill." And so the Director of Labor, in his testimony, agreed with this transfer being proper, and the U.S. Department of Labor said they have no issue with it. They're not objecting because they do keep separate accounts from the federal money and the state money. Also, if you look at the gold book from the governor's proposal, it will show you that there has been $0 transferred out of this fund in the last 5 years, and the $70 million transfer still leaves $22 million in this state unemployment insurance trust fund. And the, let's see here, just excuse me a minute. The current balance is $76.6 million. This will, excuse me, it's not going to leave 22 million. It's going to leave $12 million, but it receives about $2 or $3 million a year additional. But in fiscal year 20, 21, 22, and 23, there's been no transfers out. In 24 and 25, they're not expected to spend any of the money. And so we're leaving money in the fund, and this is a proper transfer. I ask for your red vote. I oppose FA 285. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Clemens. Senator Erdman, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you also to Senator Clements. He thoroughly explained the situation here. Let me just say, this is not a trust fund, it's a cash fund. And so we put the designation trust fund, and so then that means it's something other than that. It's actually a cash fund. And the reason, and maybe if you missed it, the reason that it's such a large balance, we never spend anything out of it. And I was called out yesterday to speak about this with a group. And I told them that I was in favor of the transfer, but I would also be in favor of eliminating the tax, or at least put a moratorium on it until it's needed. And so we have businesses make a contribution to this fund that has never been used in years, and the fund continues to grow. And it would make sense that somehow we get this money back to those who have contributed. And so by reducing some of our other needs for tax dollars, we can make a difference in the budget. And so that's what the transfer was for. We had a lengthy discussion. We had a lengthy discussion about all these transfers and appropriations. We didn't do this without a lot of discussion and concern and getting information from the department to make sure that we were sufficient in our funding. And you heard Senator Clements describe what's left.
Thank you.
And if you haven't taken any money out of this fund for a significant period of time, I would think 12 million is a good enough cushion. So I will be voting against FA 285, but I would be in favor of a bill or an amendment that would eliminate the tax until it is needed. And so the sky is not falling. The world is not going to come to an end, and your potholes will still get fixed. So vote against FA 285. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Erdman. Senator Von Gilleren, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Erdman. You encapsulated many of my own thoughts. However, I think we have a little bit of order of operations disagreement in that sweeping the account before we change the tax or eliminate the tax, I think is the wrong order to get this in. I do stand in support of FA 285, and I do, as I'm reading the statute, it says very clearly that this is a trust fund that is established for this sole purpose. I'm not against sweeping general funds. I'm not against sweeping cash funds. I think if there are departments that are not utilizing the funds that are sitting in their accounts, and there's a better way for us to utilize those, then absolutely we should do that. But I think this is a bit of an exception, and maybe I'm taking that a little bit personally because as an employer, I paid into this fund for 30 years. And so we knew that we paid into that fund. It was for a very specific purpose and a reason, and to do something different with those funds, I think is at least getting close to an edge that we don't want to get close to. I've got the statute in front of me here, and in paragraph 3, it says, if and when the state unemployment insurance tax ceases to exist as determined by the governor. So the governor has the right, in my understanding, and I'm not an attorney, the governor, in my reading of this, has the authority to eliminate the tax. So it says, when it ceases to exist, as determined by the governor, all money then in state unemployment insurance trust fund, less accrued interest shall be immediately transferred to the credit of the state's account in the unemployment trust fund any provision of this law in the state relating to deposit, blah, 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 not to the contrary withstanding. So the governor has the authority to eliminate this tax, and I think if that, certainly there's enough money in that account and has not been touched for some time. I agree completely with the logic behind that, but to sweep it out and without taking into account the elimination of the tax, I think is getting things a little bit in the wrong order. So philosophically, I'm fine with it. I'm not fine with the way that we're proposing to do it today. With that, thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Von Gilleren. Senator DeBoer, you're recognized to speak. And waves. Senator Armendariz, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to iterate again, I appreciate everybody paying attention to this particular cash fund. What I would propose is that we stay the course, do what the Appropriations Committee has recommended. Quite frankly, previous legislators should have noticed it, previous appropriations committees should have noticed it, and eliminated this fee or tax being charged to these businesses long ago. It was not done, and we need to stop doing it now. I am glad many legislators have offered to carry that or make sure that it is eliminated going in the future. We've got a couple of decisions to make. Put it back in the unemployment trust fund, as Senator Von Gilleren has stated, redistribute it to businesses, which I think logistically is extremely difficult. What we have proposed, that it goes back to all the taxpayers, along with many other overflows of taxes that have been paid, that will hit those business owners as well. I will not be voting for FA 285, and I want to challenge every legislator that will be here next session to find where there is more waste in programs, in agencies, and bring bills to eliminate it. Yeah, bring bills that you want to spend money, but that should also align with a bill that you have proposed to eliminate wasteful spending as well. There is plenty of it to be found within every agency and every program. Programs that aren't working as intended should be looked at and removed. If you want a new program, find out which one wasn't working to your satisfaction and remove it. Stop spending money on it. It will take years and years for us to pay attention to this, and I would challenge every legislator from going forward to bring bills every single session that eliminate wasteful spending that the tax dollars are going to. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Armendariz. Seeing no one else in the queue, Senator Conrad, you're recognized to close.
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, good morning, colleagues. I appreciate everybody who had a chance to share their perspective in regards to this serious and substantive amendment before you, and I want to address a few of the perspectives that were shared. Of course, each person is entitled to their own opinion and has a right to express themselves as they see fit, but let me be clear about a couple of things. Just because some senators call this a cash fund does not make it a cash fund. And that is not my opinion. Nebraska Revised Statutes 48-622.01 state the State Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund. That delineates the creation, use, investment, and operations of this particular fund. This is not a garden variety cash fund, period. This is a trust fund that employers have negotiated payments into for two specific purposes, for unemployment purposes and for job training purposes, period. Period. That is existing law. And whether or not there are related yet extraneous issues related to whether or not this fund balance is too high, even though that is by design, as to whether or not the fee should be adjusted. Number one, the governor already has the authority to do so in current law. Those matters are not before you in the budget or in the floor amendment, because we cannot change statutory law in perpetuity through a budget bill. And Appropriations Committee members know that. And other members need to understand that as well. So if there is an effort to make modifications to the program itself in terms of its structure or operations, that's great. I welcome that debate. We should give relief to businesses if that is appropriate, if we do not need to collect funds for these purposes. Sorry, my friend Senator Wayne was just sending me a little note here. And I think we can accomplish this through interim studies. I think we can accomplish this through potential legislation next year. But what the business community and the employer community are asking the legislature to do is to not make this rash sweep now, and to allow for those thoughtful conversations to happen, because there is no policy behind grabbing $70 million for this fund. It is a raid for a raid's purpose. It is a big ticket item that helps to prop up the budget for other purposes. And that is not what a trust fund is for. And if people want to move forward at this juncture with that move, they just need to be honest about it, because the law is the law. This is a trust fund. The legislative history is clear. Go back and pull it. Go back and read it. This was a carefully constructed program amongst employers and employees in concert with a diverse set of state leaders that has served our state well for over 30 years. And previous legislatures had the wisdom and thoughtfulness to not use this as a piggy bank for their own purposes whenever they saw fit. And I applaud the business groups and the employee groups who have stepped forward to fight against this misguided effort. And I will tell you, regardless of how this vote goes today, this is going to continue to be a part of the negotiations that happen from general to select file. Friends, making this sweep, in addition to the other sweeps that are baked into 1413, is divorced from economic reality. In this specific instance, it raises legal issues, policy issues, practical issues, and the other extraneous matters related to law change are not before you in a budget bill. And the senators on appropriations know that. And to say otherwise is misleading. We can and we should have those conversations. This isn't wasteful government spending. This is not meant to be an employer surcharge for property tax relief.
That's your time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President. I urge your favorable consideration of the amendment.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Members, the question is the adoption of FA 285. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. There's been a request to place the House under call. The question is, shall the House be placed under call? All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
21 ayes, 4 nays, place House under call, Mr. President.
The House is under call. Senators, please return to your place and record your presence. Those unexcused senators outside the chamber, please return to the chamber and record your presence. All unauthorized personnel, please leave the floor. The House is under call. Senator Brewer, please return to the chamber and record your presence. The House is under call. All unexcused members are present. The vote was underway. Senator Conrad, would you accept call-in votes? Now accepting call-in votes, Mr. Clerk.
Senator Frederickson voting yes. Senator Brewer voting yes. Senator DeBoer voting yes. Senator Kauth voting no. Senator Sanders voting yes. Senator Vargas voting no. Senator Hughes voting no. Senator Walls voting yes. Senator Boston voting yes. Senator Ballard voting yes. Senator Bostar voting yes. Senator Kay voting no. Repeat. Senator Repeat not voting.
Record, Mr. Clerk.
Vote is 20 yeas, 20 nays, Mr. President, on adoption of the amendment.
The amendment fails. I raise the call. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, Senator Jacobson would move to amend with FA 286.
Mr. Clerk, for a motion.
Apologies, Mr. President. A priority motion. Senator Reapy would move to reconsider the vote just taken on FA 285.
Senator Reapy, you're recognized to open.
Thank you, Mr. President. I've asked for the reconsideration given the fact is my role as chairman of the Business and Labor Committee, and I feel that this is an inappropriate confiscation of the trust fund that is intended and legally established in statute to stand on its own, and that it cannot legally be transferred. And I know that goes in opposition to what Senator Clements, I think, reported that the executive branch had stated. I do think that the money that is in that trust fund, I think we need to have either a holiday for the people that are paying that tax, or we need to make sure that that money goes towards training and workforce development, which is, of course, we have a great need for. That's what I have. And any time that I have, I'd like to offer that time to Senator Conrad, please.
Senator Reapy, she is not in the chamber presently. Senator Conrad? Senator Conrad, you were yielded 8 minutes and 25 seconds.
Thank you so much, Mr. President, and thank you to my friend Senator Reapy. There's nothing like being given the gift of time. So I will do my best to utilize it, and I want to thank Senator Reapy for switching his vote to ensure that he could file the motion to reconsider, which of course you all understand the procedural aspects under our rules in that regard. So with we did have a little bit of debate about this over the last couple of days. I think some folks were a bit caught off guard by how quickly the debate went on the specific floor amendment related to this issue. And I know that we have some members who are very passionate about this, as am I and Senator Reapy and others, who had to be off the floor for medical purposes and family purposes. So actually, I think when you look at the vote of our membership on the floor amendment, you can see that the legislature is very, very closely divided on this. There's most likely a majority that supports maintaining fidelity to these funds for specific purposes, and that is not supportive of the generalized sweep that the governor and the Appropriations Committee has put before us. That is why that policy proposal is meeting such fierce opposition from unlikely allies. Large business, small business, employer groups, unions, progressives and conservatives coming together and saying it is wrong to raid this trust fund. These taxes and fees were paid by employers for specific purposes, to support the unemployment fund and to support job training. It is wrong to sweep them and use this as a slush fund for property tax purposes or any other purpose. These funds are not going back to the employers that paid them over years and years and years to build up this funds. The proposal before you is a diversion of these funds that raises significant legal, policy, political, and practical problems. I think that we will hear more voices on this reconsideration motion. I know other members who are deeply invested in this issue are making plans to return to the body. And regardless of what happens with this vote, I think it is clear from the initial vote that this has to be a significant point of discussion, negotiation, and deliberation from general to select file, because it is not a cash fund that can or should be swept for other various and sundry purposes. This cash fund is for employment and for job training. If the balance is too high, the governor has the authority to make adjustments. If other members want to bring forward statutory changes in future years, they can and should do that. I would be happy to join that effort. We cannot make statutory changes to the program itself in the budget bill, period. So those issues are not before you this session or on the board today. Additionally, I have had some members say, well, during the pandemic, we didn't see a run on these funds, and that was a recession. You're absolutely right. And let me tell you why. Even a quick glance at recent history will show you why. Because the federal government developed specific pandemic-related unemployment insurance programs, so that wouldn't happen at the state level. That's why that didn't happen. So to say that we haven't drawn down these high balances in recent years, even during economic rocky times like COVID, misunderstands what happened in response to COVID at both the federal and state levels. This program fund has built up over years in consultation and cooperation with business groups for specific purposes. These are not surcharges or taxes on employers for other purposes. This is for unemployment and job training, period. That's what it's for. You can say it's a cash fund, you can say it built up too high, that's fine. You're entitled to your opinion. But the facts are the facts and the law is the law. And that is why business groups, labor groups, a diverse set of senators is coming together and saying no. The reason you're seeing pushback is not grounded in policy. It is because it blows a $70 hole in their budget plan, which shouldn't have been there in the first place. We are at a time of economic prosperity. We are not at a time of recession. We shouldn't be raising cash funds willy-nilly. And that's exactly what the governor and the Appropriations Committee has done. They're embarrassed about it. They can't defend it. And that is what is before you today. So I am asking you to right the wrong in regards to what happened to the Unemployment Trust Fund. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Senator Dungan, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I do rise today in favor of Senator Reepe's motion to reconsider, as well as Senator Conrad's floor amendment to the underlying LB 1413. I really appreciate Senator Reepe's opportunity to have more of a discussion on this. I had intended to speak on this and continue this conversation, but unfortunately had a number of other meetings and things and exec sessions going on this morning, so I didn't have a chance to speak. So I do appreciate the opportunity to talk about this. Senator Conrad is exactly right. This is not a partisan issue. This is not an issue of trying to just waste time. This is a legitimate amendment based on, I think, a number of really well thought out points that have been raised both in this body and by people who this directly affects. This is a really unique situation where you have, again, allies from all across the spectrum agreeing that the use of this cash fund is to be its underlying intended use and not to have it rated just to go into the general funds. You have members of labor, you have members from the chamber, you have members from the state chamber, local chamber, you have people all across the proverbial political spectrum talking about how this is an improper use of this fund. And regardless of whether or not you like the idea of sweeping cash funds or not, I think that we need to continue to focus on the legality of utilizing this fund for what this cash transfer seeks to do. As Senator Conrad had indicated, and as I had talked about a little bit yesterday as well, what we are talking about with the State Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund is a different kind of account, essentially, or a different kind of fund than any other cash fund. If you go online to the Nebraska state's own glossary, own definitions, there is a section on statespending.nebraska.gov that talks about fund types. And under the fund types, it has a glossary that delineates general fund, cash fund, construction fund, federal fund, revolving funds, distributive funds, and then finally, trust funds. By virtue of the fact that a trust fund is inherently separate and apart from a cash fund should give us pause when we are talking about taking that money and transferring it elsewhere. There are different levels of, I guess, fiduciary duty that you essentially owe by virtue of what kind of fund it's in. Nebraska Revised Statute 48622.01 says, there is hereby created in the state treasury a special fund to be known as the State Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund. Even in that line, the language of the statute tells us this needs to be treated differently than any other cash fund. This is not simply a separate account that we've placed a bunch of money in that we can tap into later if we want to. It's a special fund, and that right there is language that we do not see in most establishments of other funds, and it is a trust fund. On the Nebraska definitions on that glossary, they define trust funds very simply, saying it's used to account for assets held in a trustee capacity. Many of us here know that when accounts are held in a trustee capacity, again, there's a different fiduciary duty that you have for those assets. You can't just take those assets and move them around because you want to. You can't just take those assets and spend them how you see fit. This account was created with a specific purpose and with a very clearly outlined intent of what these funds are to be used for. We can have a totally separate discussion of whether or not we should continue to tax businesses and take that money and put it into this insurance trust fund, the unemployment insurance trust fund. We can talk about whether or not that is an appropriate charge or fee that we're placing on our small businesses and our people around the state, but that's a different conversation. Just because there's a lot of money sitting in an account that you want to use.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. That is not the conversation that we need to be having today. The conversation we're having today is whether or not this is a proper use of this money, and B, whether or not it's actually even a legal transfer of the fund. And so I do think that I hope my colleagues are listening, and I do think we're having a genuine conversation about this. I think the vote up there was very interesting. Clearly, this is an issue that I think people feel divided on, but I'm hopeful that thanks to Senator Reepe's motion to reconsider, people will listen, people will consider the votes, and maybe talk to a few folks on both sides of this issue so we can continue having this debate. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Dungan. Senator Hansen, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is a difficult vote for me because I've been a business owner since 2007 of multiple businesses, and I paid a considerable amount of money into this fund. For all intents and purposes, was intended to be used for unemployment. Whether we run into a catastrophic situation where we may have to draw down significant funds, like another pandemic where the federal funds may not be there, or some other circumstance or situation the state runs into where we have to pay out a bunch of unemployment, or like a recession. Now, is there a lot of money in that fund? Yes, there is. Is it my fault or other business owners' fault in the state of Nebraska that I got that large? No. I think it's our job maybe, and what I think would be a better solution is possibly next year, or even on select file, bringing a change to this where the money has the ability to go back to the business owners who have paid into this over the years by lowering their rates. From my understanding, and I think Senator Von Gillern mentioned this earlier, the governor right now has the ability to eliminate the tax either permanently or even temporarily as the funds get drawn down over time. I think that's a much better approach. Or we could legislatively force the department to lower the rate if it's in excess to a certain amount. So we can put some guardrails on this. So if it gets to a certain amount, if it gets too large, we can then legislate and say, hey, look, now you're forced to lower the rates to business owners. As it gets, now you're forced to draw down those funds. It's not a choice that the administration can make. It's now by mandate. So we're looking after the business owners of the state of Nebraska who employ a lot of people who paid in this over the years. And we're being considerate of their financial constraints as well, especially in these times. I just feel like that would be a better approach. I can see where everybody else is at. I'm not opposed, and I even have a hard time saying anything about what the Appropriations Committee has done, because they do a great job and they put a lot of time and effort into looking through every fund and seeing where we can help the taxpayers of Nebraska put together a great budget, which I think they have, and I commend them for it. This is just one of the portions of the budget that I might just disagree with, because I'd like to, instead of that money going to the general fund to be used for a myriad of purposes, I'd rather see it go back to the people who paid into it over the years. So I will be voting yes on the floor amendment by Senator Conrad. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hansen. Senator Clemens, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I stand in opposition to FA 285 and oppose the motion to reconsider. I've been doing some more research on this state unemployment, what's called a trust fund, but it's a cash fund. Director of the Fiscal Office, Director Patent, is an attorney and has given her opinion that the word trust fund is not in the trust fund terminology, it's really a cash fund. It's just, and we have other cash funds that have the word trust fund in their name, but we transfer money out of those as well from time to time. And so there was one other question about transfers being taken after the end of this fiscal year, budget year. Appropriations don't go any farther than the end of this year, would be June 30th of 2025, but transfers do. They are allowed beyond the budget year. And if you look at the securities fund, where there's an automatic about $22 million, I think, that comes in automatically, and we just added $15 million to that transfer this year, but 22 of it was an automatic already. So let's see. In checking with the fiscal office, this state unemployment fund was established in 1994, has never been used in 30 years. And this just keeps building up money and building up money. And this is going to be a proper use for it. And I want to tell you that what has been used for workforce, which people are wanting this to be used for workforce, we have in the budget this year from the Department of Labor a request for $20 million of general funds for workforce development, which we put in the budget. We could have just transferred $20 million from this unemployment fund and not allowed the general fund, but this transfer into the general fund from the unemployment fund is in effect funding $20 million of workforce development. Last year in the budget, we transferred $20 million more from the general fund, from the cash reserve, which really gets general fund dollars, to DED for the Intern Nebraska program. Intern Nebraska is a workforce development program. That's another $20 million that's really came from general funds, didn't come out of the unemployment fund. But those are just two items that the fiscal office, right off the top of their head, said $40 million last year and this year are already being used for workforce. And this $70 million transfer, 40 million of it it's going back in, this going into the general fund, and it's 40 million of it is, I guess, substituting for the general funds that we have approved in the past. So this fund has never been used. It is legal. We have a written email from the U.S. Department of Labor that they have no problem with this transfer. The director of Department of Labor approved of this in his testimony. And so it's a fund that's never been used. That's fine with me if you want to get rid of it. But we have spent general funds, at least 40 million we can name right now, that this is going to fund those 40 million. And I continue to oppose FA 285, and I oppose the reconsider motion. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Clemens. Senator Armendariz, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I stand opposed to FA 285 and continue to iterate that we need to do something with this fund. FA 285 proposes we leave it where it is at. The director came to appropriations, said it is not needed. He has no programs to spend that money on. We need to eliminate this fund. And if there needs to be a bill next year to finalize the elimination of collection from businesses for this fund, I more than welcome that. I also understand Senator Hansen, Senator Von Gilleren's concerns that this should go back to the businesses that paid into it for 30 years and has never been used. While I think that logistically is extremely difficult, especially with staff shortages, I would assume that I would be asked to fund more FTEs should that happen. The only proposal of where this money should go has been presented by the Appropriations Committee to distribute it back to the general fund, which is to all the taxpayers of this state. If there are better places to put this fund, which it does need to go to, I would welcome an amendment of where that should go. If it needs to go back to the business owners, please present it. Staying status quo is not an option, at least in my mind. Sitting from the appropriations viewpoint, this is an issue that should have been taken care of years ago that never was, and we're addressing it now. The fund needs to be liquidated back to the taxpayers. If somebody wants to propose to liquidate it back to the business owners, although it may be more costly, I'm not saying I would be opposed to that. FA 285 doesn't do that. It is a proposal to stay status quo. I can't support that. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Armendariz. Senator Dover, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just would like to thank Senator Clements, or Chairman Clements, for his comment, and also Senator Armendariz for her wise words. And I just like to point out that typically a lot of times the companies run on a regular fiscal year. And so, excuse me. And so if you're running on a regular fiscal year, at the end of the year, everything closes out and nothing is really carried over. Everything's moved over to equity accounts and those kind of things, owner's equity, et cetera. But that's not the case with ours. And if you actually look at page 5, the money flows through and continues to flow through because of our beginning balances, et cetera. But I just want to point out that the $70 million is actually figured in on line 10A, general funds transfers in new, and the total is $198,016,542. But if I'm urging everyone to vote no on FA 285, because if you vote yes on that, there will not be money to the floor. In fact, if you look at page 5 and you look to the far right on fiscal year 2026-27, you see a number that says 68,565,750. That number actually becomes a negative. Can I repeat that, please? That's a negative if this FA would pass. So I encourage you to vote no on FA 285. I give the rest of my time to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Dover. Senator Mosier, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, Nebraskans. So the unemployment fund is a collection of money paid in by employers, a percentage of part of their payroll that they pay their employees. And it's set aside in case you have to lay someone off. The person you lay off can get unemployment, and it's paid from, well, it's deducted from your reserve. The way it sounds, it has been paid from the federal trust fund. But we pay state unemployment tax and federal unemployment tax as employers. So part of this balance, not very much of it because my business is very small. I only have a few employees. But, 5,000 of that 63 million is money that's in my reserve. I just think fundamentally it was taxed from the citizens for a purpose. They were told that this was what it was for. And then to come along and sweep it out and spend it on something else is wrong. The problem with using this to balance property taxes is we spend too much money. We can't spend the amounts of money that we are spending now and have the revenue that we have now and fund anything to reduce property taxes. We've pushed a lot of expenses onto the counties and the schools and the other political subdivisions over the years, and they've used property tax to pay their bills. And I think raiding this fund is a mistake. And besides that, if we take the money and we aren't careful how we credit it back, to offset property tax. It may just get spent and property taxes go up. We've got several property tax funds that are supposed to help, but my taxes keep going up. The valuations go up faster and the spending goes up faster. It's not a good solution. We need to get to the bottom of our spending, get to the bottom of our taxation, and get ourselves on a trajectory that's sustainable over time. You can only raid these funds every so often. You can't. What are you going to raid next year? You raid this one now? You know, who's up to be raided next year? It's not a sustainable solution. I would encourage you to vote for the reconsideration, and I encourage you to vote for the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Mosier. Senator Blood, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President, fellow senators, friends all. I stand in support of the reconsideration. And I got to say, I love all these things that have been echoed back to me that I've been saying for 2 days. Long-term planning. We can't keep sweeping funds and make it sustainable. I disagree that it's okay to front load. And it's kind of awesome listening to debate and listening to people start repeating things that we know to be true. But with that, I would ask that Senator Clements yield to a question.
Senator Clements, would you yield to a question?
Yes.
Thank you, Senator Clements. And I'm sorry I didn't get to come and talk to you first. I just got back in from talking to a student. Senator Clements, I keep going through the budget and I'm not seeing it. Can you tell me where in the executive branch they've reduced their spending or the percentage of amount of money that they took out to help with property taxes? What was the reduction?
You mean the governor's budget itself? He's held it flat with no increase last year and this year.
Okay, so no funds to contribute to property tax relief for anything that he has?
He has a military fund that was from COVID money. I think it was $13 million. It was at least that was returned to the general fund.
Okay. I appreciate that clarification because I looked really hard and I couldn't find anything. So that is actually quite helpful. Thank you, Senator. We need to vote green on this reconsideration. I think it's curious that now the chambers don't want that money to go anywhere, but when they had the bill that was meant to be the platform for doing this, they testified in favor of that bill. So I hope that they think about those things before they come and testify in front of Business and Labor in the future. And I know that that's their job and that's what they are paid to do, and I don't fault them for that, but it's unfortunate. I understand that we are upsetting the apple cart. And I respect the fact that appropriations is sticking together. Good for you for being a unified front. But not everybody feels that way. And I go back again to last Friday when every single small business owner at an event that I was at was angry and insulted that this was being done and felt that if things like this were necessary, they should be talking to the business community. And now we hear through Senator Conrad that the business community has indeed stepped up against this. I don't work for special interest. I don't work for party. I work for my constituents, and my constituents do not want this money to go anywhere that they paid into, regardless of your explanations. And you heard me earlier talk about recession and inflation and why we need to keep this fund whole. And unless we change state statute, we really can't do it legally anyway. So again, friends, vote green. You're doing the right thing for your constituents. I'm sorry that it's going to create an issue for appropriations, but it's money that needs to stay put. With that, I would yield back any time to you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Blood. Mr. Clerk, for items.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Committee on Appropriations, chaired by Senator Clements, reports Legislative Bill 942 to general file with committee amendments. Additionally, your Committee on Government, Military, and Veterans Affairs, chaired by Senator Brewer, reports Legislative Bill 1358 to general file with committee amendments. Amendments to be printed Senator Holcroft to LB 876, Senator Hardin 1120, Senator Dorn 130, Senator Brewer 1412, Senator Holcroft 1412. New LR 321 from Senator Conrad, as well as, that'll be referred to the executive board. LR 322 from Senator Hughes, that'll be laid over. New LR 323 from Senator John Kavanaugh, that will be laid over. Committee report concerning gubernatorial appointments to the Nebraska Educational Telecommunications Commission, as well as the Technical Advisory Committee for Statewide Assessment. Finally, Mr. President, priority motion. Senator Albright would move to recess the body until 1:30 p.m.
Members, you've heard the motion to recess. All those in favor, say aye. All those opposed, say nay. We are in recess.